Did you always have a love of art from an early age?
Yep, I was always drawing and painting, and when I was at school, when I did A levels, I did art um, and sciences, and I considered doing painting then, but figured it was difficult to make an adequate living, so that's why I ended up doing medicine. But art was very much a significant part of my childhood and sort of growing up. Yeah.
And when you actually retired, did you sort of take on a certain genre of art? Were you drawn towards a particular genre?
I've always been um, pretty well obsessed with Italian 15th century tempera painting, and I think it was because when I was a child and I used to go to the National Gallery in the days that you could go up to London by yourself, you go around the National Gallery and you go sort of almost, in those days you could sort of go back in time, so you can go from the modern paintings to the 18th century paintings, and they're all sort of brown and dull, and then you get back into the 15th century, and suddenly you have this pow, these bright colours because of the tempera painting and the gold, and I was fascinated because the colours were so clear and yet so old, and there was something serene about the painting technique. It wasn't as laboured as some of the later paintings. So when I was at school, I was still pretty well obsessed by that sort of painting, and other people were interested in Picasso and Magritte and Matisse, and I was more interested in Da Vinci and Filippo Lippi and Giotto, and the earlier artists.
And sitting here, we're surrounded by all different types of your art. Would you say that you are more oils or watercolor or your art, the egg tempera? What is your speciality really?
I'm interested in the transition between tempera and oil.
Hmm.
So, and there actually is a mixed technique that I use, which is called tempera glassa, which is a mixture of using egg yolk and oil.
And is that something that you've had to learn to use?
Yeah, not many people use that, so I've had to go back to source documents. Cianini, who he did a a sort of a classic description of techniques going back at 15th, 16th century time. So yes, I've had to go back to original documentation, and also you can glean now with scientific evidence. You can glean quite a lot of information about different pigments that were used in different circumstances, and so I also read books about conservation and analysis, and the National Gallery they produce a series of booklets. Well, they're actually journals about certain analyses of painting techniques. So I'm pretty obsessed with technique. Yeah.
What I suppose is your largest work of art to date,
Yeah.
which is The Last Supper. What was the genesis of that?
Um, well, I mean, it's in the Last Supper genre, but it's not called the Last Supper. It's called The Weight of Blood. Um, I was in Florence for a month a couple of years ago um, to learn a bit of Italian, and um, I also took the opportunity to spend some time with this guy, Charles Cecil, at Cecil Studios, and to do some life drawing. Um, and obviously, Florence has got some fantastic art, and so I took the opportunity to see a lot of it. And one of the paintings that I hadn't seen before was The Last Supper by a Florentine painter called Andrea del Sarto. And it's a very large painting, obviously not as famous as Da Vinci's. And it was absolutely fantastic. And you can go and see it for free. So I spent a long time, I visited 2 or 3 times looking at it. And I tried to, I was very mesmerised by it. And then I was thinking about the Last Supper and the meaning of it, and also um, the idea that it would be very unusual to get essentially a group of your friends or important men in your life together all in one place for a Last Supper, and that would be very unusual. And then I thought, well, that'd be quite a good thing to do. And also, producing a painting with 13 people in is very difficult in terms of its composition. And so it started this idea of painting a Last Supper, but the characters in the Last Supper would have to relate to me because the painting is basically about friendship and also the act of betrayal that, when it happens, will blow apart that friendship. So I decided I would embark upon this process of painting Last Supper, and invite a significant male at different stages in my life, all the way from play school, effectively, all the way through to sort of more recent friends, and that's how the project started. The moment I wanted to capture was when Christ states that one of his disciples were going to betray him. So I didn't want to cast anybody as Judas per se. I wanted to capture the moment when the betrayal, somebody was doing the betrayal, and therefore I wanted people to look at each other in the sort of that moment where people are saying, well, who is the person who's committing this betrayal? So I was more keen in getting the physicality, the relationships of these individuals in the right locations, and to get the shadows. I very much like shadows and light, and to get all the technical aspects of the painting or the composition correct, because that was the only shot I had. So
from the actual mechanics of the painting, you individually photographed all of the disciples afterwards. Is that right?
Yeah.
Presumably to get their facial expressions right, or to your way of liking, and then the actual process from the photo shoot. What was involved after the actual photos were processed and you'd chosen the one that you wanted?
Well, the actual painting is composed of not just one. I didn't choose one photo. I used all the photos to create different components. So the next step really was to sort of draw out the composition on the canvas using these studies, and then do something called a grisaille, which is sort of just a simple tonal painting to get the relationships and the shadows and the highlights in the right place. So that's what I did initially, and then gradually over a year built up the painting. And the reason for doing a series of individual photographs of people was to, when you're painting people, you get to know their features, their faces very intimately, and there are things like the areas around people's eyes, or the nostrils, or the relationship between the nostrils and the mouth and the chin, that are very characteristic and also very subtly different. So taking the photographs of people individually helped me just to work out, I suppose, their anatomy in greater detail. Because one of the things that I wanted to do was, I didn't just want to make a picture, I wanted to really paint portraits of everybody. So when they saw the picture, they could see it was them, because I think that's one of the great challenges of painting, is making something look like the individual.
And the actual process you chose was just oils, or was it egg tempera, or was it?
No, I decided to use oils, and the reason for that is that it's much more forgiving. With egg tempera, it's a bit like watercolour. Once you make the mark, then it's quite difficult to change it, whereas oils are much more forgiving. So if you make any errors, you can overpaint it, and if you apply oils relatively wet, you can move it about on the surface, so it's much more flexible.
Yeah, there was no identification of any of the disciples whatsoever because of the Iscariot problem, but you also chose your son as Jesus. Why was that?
Well, somebody had to do it, and he's the biggest bloke there, so that seemed the easiest option. But I think that, and funny enough, somebody joked to me that the reason why I chose my son to be Jesus, that would make me God. But it wasn't that reason. It was just that I wanted the disciples who were my friends, and my relationship with my son is obviously slightly different. He is a friend, but he's also my son. And so it sort of made sense, because that sort of relationship I have with my son is different, and that he was Christ. And I thought that it would be inappropriate for me to be Christ. So that was the sort of decision I ended up making.
Are you pleased with the picture?
Yeah, I think the picture works. I think that it's very difficult when you're doing a painting like that to stop. You end up tinkering, and I think you're not always. It's very difficult if you're. I mean, I'm sort of self-competitive. I don't really compete with anybody else, and I think it's a reasonable rendition, and I think it was received well by the people who within it, which was the most important thing. Because I wanted to make sure I satisfied the people who participated, and I think when it was revealed, people were pleased with it.
Yes, well, I was privy to that, so I can back that up. I'm interested to understand. Well, actually, it's fascinating that your entry into the portrait of the year is actually 13 portraits, isn't it?
You mean the BP portrait?
Yeah.
Prize?
It's actually 13 portraits, isn't it?
It's a multiple portrait, yeah.
Yeah.
But the BP awards, there's not, a few people do multiple portraits. It's not unusual in that sense.
But it must put it. I say that will put you. It doesn't put you in the favourites, so to speak. But having produced 13 individual portraits is an incredible challenge, and to have done that in a year is quite remarkable. But I'm interested to understand why you entered. To be honest with you.
I think that it's sort of a benchmark, really, because I'm a sort of, as we've discussed, I'm sort of pretty much self-taught, and also the paintings I do, they're not necessarily contemporary. I do what I do because I like it, and I do like religious subjects, I do like spiritual subjects, but they're not really contemporary. They're seen as contemporary by a lot of the, inverted commas, contemporary artwork. And I go to the BP Awards every year, and I very much enjoy looking at them, and I can appreciate the skill in doing it. And when I went last year, I thought, well, actually, my own painting isn't that shoddy by comparison. So I thought I would enter it just to see, how it fared when you get an expert eye who are interested in portraiture.
And you've got shortlisted, which is fantastic. But whether you're shown or not, it must be immensely satisfying to have been shortlisted.
Yeah, for me that's success enough, actually.